Hi, Mary. I love you.
It began with a whisper, faint as breath between leaves. Hi, Mary. I love you. No one was there. At least, no one the adults could see. Yet from that moment, something unseen took root in the Thompson home of Denver. Quiet, ordinary, and soon, holy. Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. Before the miracles, there was only silence, the kind that aches between prayers. 8 calendars torn, each month marked by crimson and disappointment. Bridges unbuilt, hope shelved beside hospital forms and bottles of pills. Rachel, a librarian who worshipped order and the hush of paper, now cataloged heartache by the year. Michael, a civil engineer, built perfect structures at work while faith in their own foundation began to tremble. One night, beneath the hum of the bathroom light, Rachel stared at her reflection. "Enough," she whispered. The mirror answered with tired eyes. And somewhere, in the stillness that follows surrender, grace began moving unseen. 18 months later came the call. A boy was waiting, 3 years old, name Ethan Miller. Rachel's breath caught when she saw his photo. Brown hair slightly untamed, eyes too large, too knowing. A face that looked as though he had already survived a winter the world hadn't noticed. He arrived on an April afternoon carrying a tiny backpack, 3 shirts, a threadbare blanket, a broken toy car. Rachel remembered the air itself felt different when he stepped inside. He paused on the threshold, gaze sweeping the house, like a wanderer measuring how long he might be allowed to stay. "Hi, Ethan," Rachel said, kneeling to meet him. "Welcome home." He nodded, polite, distant. No smile. The first weeks were quiet. Ethan's silence had weight, not shyness but defense. He never asked for food, never complained. He watched Rachel with the calm patience of someone used to waiting for doors to close. Michael tried cartoons, games, silly dances. Ethan joined, obedient but detached, as if joy were something borrowed. At night, the couple whispered fears into the dark. "What if he never opens up?" Michael sighed. "He will," Rachel murmured, though her voice trembled. "He just needs time." Behind the house stretched Rachel's refuge, a small garden of devotion and memory. 10 years earlier, she planted rose bushes there, pink and red, guardians of her hope. A cherry tree leaned in gentle shade, and in the far corner stood a stone niche, worn smooth by years. Within it, the Virgin Mary, marble hands extended, robe of faded celestial blue. The statue had belonged to Rachel's grandmother, who'd prayed beside it every evening until her last breath. When the old woman passed, Rachel placed the figure in her own garden, not as decoration, but inheritance of faith. Neither she nor Michael guessed it would become the heart of something miraculous. 3 weeks after Ethan's arrival, spring sunlight poured through the kitchen window. Rachel looked out and froze. Ethan stood before the statue, motionless. Small palms touched the stone ledge. His mouth shaped silent syllables, head cocked, as if awaiting reply. A breeze stirred the roses. Rachel smiled faintly, thinking, maybe he's finally at peace. The next morning, as sunlight bled across the floorboards, Ethan broke his pattern of silence. "Can I go outside?" Rachel blinked, the first request he'd ever made. "Of course, sweetheart." He walked straight to the niche. No toys, no hesitation. From the window, Rachel watched him kneel, Hands folded clumsily, face lifted. Lips moved again, not in babble, but rhythm, conversation. Then stillness, listening. Rachel felt a tremor in her chest, curiosity laced with unease. She stepped outside quietly, the smell of earth thick after watering. "Ethan," she called gently. "Who are you talking to?" He turned, startled, guilt flickering across his face like a shadow. "To the lady in blue," he said simply. Rachel followed his gaze to the Virgin's painted robe. "The lady in blue? She's very kind." Rachel knelt, heart beating fast. "What does she say?" Ethan hesitated, his small fingers tracing the stone. "She says you want me to stay, that you won't send me away." The air thickened. Rachel's throat tightened. She cupped his face. "Ethan, look at me. You're home now. You're not going anywhere." He blinked, eyes bright with something beyond childhood. "That's what she said too." That night, Rachel said nothing to Michael. She wanted to believe it was imagination, the tender hallucination of a child learning love. Yet when she passed the window and saw moonlight washing over the statue, her skin prickled with something older than fear, remembrance. Each day afterward, Ethan returned to the garden. 10 minutes of quiet communion, lips barely moving, then laughter, sudden, pure, like sunlight finding a window that had long been closed. Rachel watched, torn between comfort and wonder. Then came Thursday. The air smelled of rosemary and rain. Rachel stood at the counter slicing carrots when Ethan burst through the door, breathless. "Mom, Rachel!" The name struck her heart like a bell. It was the first time he'd said it. She turned. "What is it, sweetheart?" He grabbed her hand. "Blue lady warns. Honey poison in neighbor's wall. Spark waits." His voice trembled, but his eyes were steady. Rachel stared. "What?" "She says fire sleeps inside Mr. Harrison's house." Mr. Harrison, their elderly neighbor, lived alone next door. Rational thought whispered coincidence, but something deeper, that same hush she'd felt under the mirror light months ago, told her to move. Minutes later she stood at the fence calling, "Mr. Harrison, I know this sounds odd, but have you smelled anything strange lately?" He wiped his hands, frowning. "Now that you mention it, a sweet smell in my kitchen these last nights." "Maybe check your gas line," Rachel said. An hour later, the technician found a small leak, invisible, deadly, behind the kitchen wall. When Mr. Harrison came to thank her, his face pale, Rachel could only nod. Inside, disbelief wrestled with awe. Ethan couldn't have smelled it. He'd been playing far from the house. That evening, Rachel stood at the window. The garden lay bathed in twilight. Ethan slept upstairs, his breathing soft. The statue glowed faintly beneath the last gold of day, petals around it stirring as if touched by unseen fingers. Petals unfurled bolder, sent deeper, as if breathed upon. And though Rachel would never say it aloud, she felt the faint echo of words that didn't belong to her. "Do not fear. He is home." For the next few days, the Thompson house lived under a strange quiet. Ethan played more now, laughter slipping out like light through curtains, but Rachel's heart had changed. She could no longer look at the small statue in the garden without remembering what had happened. That invisible warning, the smell of gas, the way the petals bloomed stronger that night. She wanted to call it coincidence, yet the word felt too small. Coincidence didn't make a 3-year-old whisper about fire sleeping in a wall. Coincidence didn't save a man's life. On Sunday morning, Michael was reading the newspaper at the table when Rachel finally told him everything. She spoke quickly, carefully, watching his face tighten. "He said the lady in blue told him. she ended quietly. Michael folded the paper slowly. Ratch, he's a kid. Kids make up stories. I know, she said. But he described the smell before the technician even found the leak. Word for word. Michael sighed, rubbing his temples. You're saying our son is, what? A prophet? Rachel flinched. I'm saying I don't know. They sat in silence, the clock ticking loudly between them. Outside, sunlight pooled over the roses, and Ethan's laughter echoed faintly. That night, Rachel dreamed she was standing in the garden again. The air was filled with the scent of wet soil and burning sugar. The statue of the Virgin shimmered, not moving, not alive, yet every petal around it seemed to breathe. When she woke, her hands smelled faintly of roses. Days blurred into weeks. Ethan's routine became sacred in its simplicity. Daycare in the morning, a snack after, then 10 quiet minutes by the garden shrine. Rachel tried to act casual, not to stare too often through the kitchen window, but something about the sight of her little boy whispering to the stone figure both calmed and unsettled her. She began writing things down, dates, small phrases Ethan said afterward, even the color of the evening sky. Monday, blue sky, calm wind. He laughed afterward. Wednesday, he said the lady smiled. Thursday, silence, long silence, as if he were listening. It was part mother's curiosity, part scientist's observation, and part believer's trembling faith. Sometimes she caught herself wondering, what if faith isn't a feeling, but a pattern we only recognize after it saves us? Ethan, for his part, spoke little about what he saw. When Rachel asked gentle questions, what does she look like? Or, what do you talk about? He answered in small fragments, as though describing a dream. She shines, but not bright, like the moon, he said once. She smells like the flowers when they wake up. Rachel didn't know what to do with those words. Part of her wanted to record them, to build meaning. Another part feared she might profane something holy just by trying to explain it. One afternoon, as she knelt among the roses trimming dead petals, Ethan appeared beside her. He looked thoughtful. Mom, Rachel, he said, the lady says you pray too small. Rachel looked up. Too small? Ethan nodded. You ask for little things, like sleep or calm. She says you can ask big things too. Rachel swallowed, eyes stinging. Like what? Ethan's voice softened. Like joy that doesn't go away. The shears slipped from her fingers. For a moment, the world seemed to blur. She gathered him into her arms, and Ethan let her hold him, still quiet, like a child who understood more than he should. The next day, Michael came home late from work, shoulders tense. He had spent the evening with colleagues, discussing a project. Rachel made tea while he loosened his tie. You're thinking about it again, he said finally. I can't help it. I'm not saying I don't believe something strange happened, he said carefully. But maybe Ethan overheard something, the gas company truck outside, or Mr. Harrison talking earlier. He was in the backyard. Rachel interrupted. There was no one there. Michael frowned. Then how? She had no answer. Only that the thought of dismissing it felt like turning her back on something luminous. Later that night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Rachel stood at the window again. The garden lay silver under the moon. She could hear faint rustling, maybe the cherry leaves, maybe more. She whispered, Who are you? Why us? There was no reply, only stillness and that faint, sweet scent that sometimes seemed to rise from the roses long after dark. A week later, Ethan's daycare teacher pulled Rachel aside during pickup. He's remarkable, the woman said cautiously. Quiet, but incredibly observant. Today, during nap time, one of the children had a nosebleed in their sleep. Before it happened, Ethan walked over and handed me tissues. He said he'll need these soon. Rachel's stomach tightened. And then? The teacher hesitated. Not even a minute later, the little boy started bleeding. It's probably coincidence, but I thought you should know. Rachel thanked her, though her pulse was unsteady. She drove home with the radio off, her mind replaying every word. That evening she asked Ethan, "Did you talk to the lady today?" He nodded absently, building a small tower with wooden blocks. She said to be gentle when people are scared. That helps her speak louder. Rachel knelt, her hands trembling slightly. Louder? He smiled faintly. You'll see. The following Sunday, they visited church together for the first time since Ethan's arrival. The pews smelled of wax and wood polish, the late light painting soft halos through stained glass. Rachel watched Ethan trace his finger along the image of the Virgin above the altar. He smiled, not at the art, but at something beyond it. During Mass, when the priest spoke of miracles as glimpses of mercy that refuse explanation, Rachel felt her throat close. Ethan was humming quietly, a tune she didn't recognize, gentle, slow, almost like a lullaby. After the service, an old woman sitting behind them leaned forward. "Your boy has a beautiful voice," she whispered. "It's like he's praying." Rachel turned to Ethan. "What were you singing?" He shrugged. "The lady taught me. It's for when someone's afraid." That night, Rachel lay awake beside Michael, the hymn still echoing faintly in her head. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she was beginning to understand something sacred had chosen to dwell in their ordinary home. The first sign, she thought, had already come and gone, the warning, the fire that never was. But deep inside, she felt there would be more. The world had begun to whisper through her child, and the Virgin, quiet as dawn, was still listening. By mid-May, the Denver air smelled of rain and lilacs. The garden was a riot of color, alive with bees, and the slow hum of summer beginning. Life in the Thompson home had almost found its rhythm again. Ethan laughed more freely now. He was still quiet, still unusually perceptive, but the sadness that once clung to him had begun to dissolve. And yet, beneath the peace, Rachel felt a strange pulse of waiting, like the air before a storm. Something told her that the lady in blue had not finished speaking. One Tuesday morning, Rachel stopped by the small pharmacy 2 blocks from home. The pharmacist, Janet, greeted her by name. They'd known each other for years. Rachel handed over her usual prescription for anxiety medication, the same one she had taken for nearly a decade. She smiled politely, picked up the bottle, paid, and went home without a second thought. When she entered the house, the sunlight poured through the kitchen window. Ethan sat on the floor, drawing in his little sketch pad. He looked up the moment he saw the small white bag in her hand. His blue eyes darkened. "What's that?" "My medicine," Rachel said lightly. "Mom's helper." He stood up, eyes never leaving the bottle. "Don't take it." Rachel blinked. "What?" Ethan's voice came sharper than usual, urgent, trembling. "The lady said it's wrong. If you take it, you'll get very sick." She frowned, caught between concern and irritation. "Sweetheart, it's the same medicine I've been taking for years." He shook his head, stepping closer. "No, the wrong kind. She says it's bad, really bad. Honey poison, she said." "Honey poison?" Rachel repeated softly, the words chilling her more than she cared to admit. The phrase was strange, childlike, but somehow vivid. Ethan grabbed her hand with both of his. Please, Mom, Rachel. Please don't take it. She stared at him, his eyes wide and glistening, his little chest rising fast. For a moment, she almost laughed to ease the tension. But then memory struck, the smell of gas, the trembling pedals, the words, "Fire sleeps inside." A knot of fear coiled in her stomach. "All right," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Let's check, okay? Just to make sure." She picked up the phone and called the pharmacy. "Hi, this is Rachel Thompson. I just picked up my prescription and I wanted to confirm the details on it." There was the familiar voice of Janet, cheerful and calm. "Of course, Rachel. Just read me the batch number on the label." Rachel squinted, reading off the small printed digits. There was a pause, long, too long. "Mrs. Thompson," Janet said finally, her tone changed. "Could you come back here, please? Bring the bottle with you. Right now." Rachel's hand went cold. "Why? What happened?" "I'll explain here," Janet replied, tight and careful. Within minutes, Rachel had bundled Ethan into the car and driven the short distance to the pharmacy. Janet and the manager, Patricia, were waiting behind the counter, pale and visibly shaken. Patricia spoke first. "Mrs. Thompson, there's been a very serious mistake. That bottle doesn't contain your prescription. The system mislabeled a shipment this morning." Rachel felt the room tilt slightly. "What's in it?" "A medication meant for severe hypertension. Given your current prescription and blood pressure, even a small dose could have triggered a dangerous reaction." Patricia hesitated, voice breaking. "If you had taken it this morning, it might have sent you into cardiac arrest." Rachel's throat closed. She couldn't breathe. "I almost did," she whispered. "I was going to." Janet nodded quickly. "We're so sorry, Rachel. We've already contacted the manufacturer. This will never happen again." But Rachel barely heard her. The world had gone silent except for the echo of Ethan's small, desperate voice. "The lady said it's wrong." Back in the car, Rachel sat still for a long moment. Ethan watched her quietly from the back seat, clutching his toy car. Finally, she turned around and reached for him, pulling him into her arms. "Thank you," she whispered into his hair. "Thank you, my love." He nodded against her shoulder. "She told me I had to say it fast." Rachel's tears came then, not just from fear, but from something deeper, the sharp awareness that heaven had bent down once more to reach them. That night, she told Michael everything. He listened in silence, face pale, hand gripping his coffee mug until his knuckles whitened. "You're saying our 3-year-old saved your life," he said finally, voice low. "Yes. Twice now." Michael set the mug down carefully. "Ratch, do you realize what that means? If this is true—" She cut him off softly. "It is true." He rubbed his face, looking lost. "But why him? Why us?" Rachel shook her head. "Maybe because we needed to believe again." Neither spoke for a while. The hum of the refrigerator filled the kitchen. Outside, the garden glowed faintly in the moonlight, the Virgin's marble face serene as ever. Michael stood and walked to the window, staring at the statue. "I can't deny the facts," he said quietly. "But it scares me. What if this isn't good? What if we don't understand what's happening?" Rachel joined him. "Maybe we don't have to understand. Maybe we just have to listen." Over the next week, Rachel noticed subtle changes. Ethan still played in the garden, but his time by the niche seemed different now, deeper, quieter. He didn't always speak aloud. Sometimes he just sat there, eyes closed, as though listening to something carried by the wind. One evening, she stepped out and sat beside him. The air smelled of earth after rain. "Does she still talk to you?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "She says it's not about knowing. It's about trusting." Rachel smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "And what does she want us to trust?" Ethan thought for a moment. "That love sees further than fear." Rachel felt tears press behind her eyes. She wanted to ask more, but the words wouldn't come. They just sat together, mother and child, before the quiet figure in blue stone. Above them, the roses had bloomed again, heavy, fragrant, almost luminous in the dusk. Rachel closed her eyes and whispered a prayer she hadn't dared to say in years. "If you're truly here, help me to see." Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmured. The petals trembled as if something unseen had passed by, a wind without air, a breath without sound. It was the second time Grace had crossed their threshold, and Rachel felt it this time, not as shock or proof, but as peace. A quiet, inexplicable peace that told her the lady was still watching. By June, the days in Denver burned bright and dry. The roses were in full bloom. Their fragrance clung to the house like prayer. For a while, life felt normal. Too normal. Rachel watered the garden each morning. Ethan played in the grass. Michael typed away in his home office. Yet in the stillness between their routines, a faint unease rippled, a sense that heaven had not finished speaking. One Friday morning, Michael sat at his desk, glasses low on his nose, working through notes for an important engineering presentation in Chicago. It was his chance to lead a major project, the kind that could change everything for his career. He planned to leave Sunday afternoon, drive 10 hours, and arrive before dawn. Ethan wandered into the office, clutching his toy car. His hair was messy from sleep, his blue eyes thoughtful. Michael smiled absently. "Morning, champ." Ethan didn't smile back. "Father Michael," he said softly, a title he sometimes used when he wanted to be serious. "Yes, buddy. The lady says you can't go the same way you always go." Michael looked up, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "She says there's danger on that road. Very bad danger. You need to take another one." Michael frowned, leaning back. "Danger?" Ethan nodded, eyes wide, voice trembling slightly. "Please, Father Michael, promise her you won't take that road." Michael hesitated. Part of him wanted to dismiss it, the mind of a child spinning fantasy. But another part, buried deep beneath reason, remembered the gas leak, the medicine bottle, the impossible timing of both. "Ethan," he said carefully, "that road is the shortest route. I've driven it 100 times. But not this time," Ethan whispered. "She said the wind there smells like blood and metal." Something cold moved through the room. Michael swallowed, suddenly aware of how still the air felt. "All right," he said finally, forcing a smile. "I'll take another way." Rachel appeared at the door just then, having overheard. Their eyes met, one look heavy with memory, with all the things they could no longer deny.
Sunday arrived. Michael loaded the car, kissed Rachel and Ethan goodbye, and drove off, though not on the road he usually took. The trip stretched long but uneventful. The miles rolled by in golden light until night fell, and Michael, exhausted but safe, reached his Chicago hotel near dawn. The next morning, as he sipped coffee in the hotel cafe, the television in the corner caught his attention. The headline made his heart stop. "Fatal accident shuts down main highway, multiple injuries." He turned up the volume. The accident had happened at 7 p.m. the night before, precisely the time he would have been on that highway. A truck had jackknifed it across lanes, colliding with several cars. 4 people were in critical condition. The mud trembled in his hand. He couldn't finish his coffee. When he returned home 3 days later, Michael went straight to the garden. Ethan was sitting in front of the Virgin's niche, stacking small stones. Michael knelt beside him, voice thick. "Thank you," he whispered. "You saved my life." Ethan didn't look surprised. "She said you believe now." That night, Rachel and Michael sat in silence on the couch, their fingers entwined. "I can't call it coincidence anymore," Michael said finally. 3 times. Each one impossible. Rachel nodded slowly. "She's protecting us, Michael. All of us." He looked at her, eyes clouded with something deeper than fear, awe. "But why through him? Maybe children hear what adults have forgotten how to listen for." Neither spoke again, but both knew the world around them had shifted. A thin veil pulled back to reveal something vast, gentle, and terrifyingly real. 2 weeks later, the next sign arrived, not in their house, but through a voice trembling with love and guilt. It was a Saturday morning in late June. The sunlight spilled across the kitchen table where Rachel was making pancakes. Ethan was humming softly, a melody that sometimes came to him after his quiet talks in the garden. "Mom, Rachel," he said suddenly, setting down his fork. "Aunt Sarah is sick." Rachel froze. "What?" "The lady says it's very bad. She needs to go to the doctor right now." Rachel's heart skipped. Ethan had never met Sarah, her younger sister who lived an hour away in Boulder. They hadn't spoken much in years. Too many sharp words left hanging in old arguments. "Ethan," Rachel said gently, "you don't even know your Aunt Sarah." He met her gaze. "The lady showed me. She said you must call her now. She's in pain." Rachel's stomach tightened. She turned to Michael, who looked up from the newspaper, pale. Neither of them needed to speak. After the gas, the pills, and the highway, how could they ignore this? Rachel picked up the phone, her hands trembling as she dialed. The call rang 4 times before Sarah's voice answered, thin and strained. "Hello? Sarah, it's Rachel." A pause. "Rachel? Are you okay?" "I'm fine. I just need to ask something. Are you feeling sick?" Another pause, longer this time. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice cracked. "How did you know?" Rachel's breath hitched. "I've been having terrible stomach pain all week," Sarah continued. "I thought it was food poisoning, but it's getting worse. I didn't tell anyone." "Sarah," Rachel said urgently, "you need to go to the hospital. Now! Promise me." "Ratch, please, don't wait. I'll meet you there." The tone in her voice, half command, half plea, broke through years of silence. Within an hour, Rachel, Michael, and Ethan were driving toward Boulder. The road shimmered with heat. Rachel's fingers clenched the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. At the hospital, the waiting room air felt thick. Hours passed. Finally, a doctor appeared. "Are you Sarah Thompson's family?" "Yes," Rachel said, standing quickly. "Your sister had acute appendicitis. It was about to rupture. We operated in time, but it was very close. Another few hours, and the outcome could have been much worse." Rachel's legs nearly gave way. Michael caught her, guiding her to a seat as tears spilled down her cheeks. When they were finally allowed in, Sarah lay pale but awake, eyes wet. "How did you know?" she whispered. Rachel looked down at Ethan, who stood quietly beside her, his small hand resting against the hospital bed. "It's a long story." Sarah's lip quivered. "You saved my life." Rachel smiled through tears. "No, he did. We just listened." On the drive home, the late evening sky burned orange. The car was silent except for the sound of Ethan's soft humming. Michael reached over and took Rachel's hand. "He's not just our son," he said quietly. "He's a messenger. Rachel looked out the window toward the darkening horizon. Maybe he's both, she said. Maybe that's how grace works, through the ordinary people we love. At home, as dusk deepened, Rachel stepped into the garden. The roses were heavy with bloom, their scent almost overpowering. She knelt before the statue of the Virgin Mary, the marble cool beneath her fingertips. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving them, for giving him to us." A wind stirred, soft and warm, rustling the petals. Somewhere in the shadows, Ethan's laughter rang out, clear, light, and alive. And for a fleeting instant, Rachel thought she heard another laugh join his, gentle, distant, like joy carried on the breath of heaven. By July, Denver pulsed with summer heat, the kind that silences even the birds. The Thompson garden was a blaze of color, its roses too heavy to hold their own heads. Rachel watered them early every morning before the sun rose too high, whispering small prayers she barely realized she was saying. Ethan had changed. His cheeks were rounder now, his smile easier. He played with toy cars in the dirt, built small forts under the cherry tree. But even in his laughter, there was a depth that didn't belong to a child of 3, a calm that seemed borrowed from heaven itself. Michael and Rachel watched him, half in gratitude, half in quiet fear. They had seen enough to know his words carried weight. Each time Ethan paused to listen to the invisible lady in blue, both parents felt the world itself hold its breath. Then came the storm. The weather forecast that Thursday had mentioned thunderstorms for the weekend. Nothing unusual. Colorado summers often brewed tempests from clear skies. But when Ethan returned from the garden that afternoon, his face was pale, his lips trembling. "Mom Rachel, Dad Michael," his voice cracked. "We have to tell Mrs. Coleman." Rachel frowned, setting down her book. "Tell her what, sweetheart?" He burst into tears. "The lady says her big tree is going to fall. Soon. You have to warn her." Michael blinked, trying to process the words. "Her tree? The cottonwood," Ethan sobbed. "The one by her room. It's going to break in the storm. You have to tell her tonight." Rachel felt her chest tighten. Mrs. Coleman, their neighbor across the street, was a kind widow in her 70s, who tended her yard with the patience of prayer. Her cottonwood tree had been there longer than most houses on the block, broad, ancient, strong. Michael crouched beside Ethan. "Buddy, trees don't just fall. That one's been standing for 50 years. Ethan shook his head violently. "No. The lady showed me. The wind will come, and it will fall right where she sleeps." The air in the room felt thick. Michael exchanged a glance with Rachel, a wordless conversation they'd had too many times. Disbelief, fear, surrender. "I'll talk to her," Michael said quietly. He crossed the street as dusk fell. Mrs. Coleman opened the door, smiling gently. "Michael! What a surprise!" He cleared his throat. "This will sound odd, but could you maybe stay out of your bedroom during the storm tomorrow night? Just in case." Her brow furrowed. "Why on earth?" Michael hesitated. "We think that old tree might not hold. Maybe you should sleep in the guest room." She studied him for a long moment, kind eyes narrowing slightly. "Has Ethan been saying things again?" Michael smiled awkwardly. "He just worries. And after what's happened before, well, we'd rather look silly than sorry." Mrs. Coleman sighed, amused but gentle. "All right, dear. If it will help you rest, I'll move to the guest room for a night." Michael thanked her, still uncertain, and returned home. The next day, the sky darkened early. Heavy clouds rolled across the Rockies like bruises. By evening, rain drummed against the windows, the wind rising in long, howling breaths. Thunder cracked over the rooftops, sudden, fierce, intimate. Rachel checked the time. 9:30 p.m. Ethan was asleep upstairs, his small hand curled around his blanket. Michael stood at the window, watching the streetlights sway. Then, a sound unlike anything else. A sharp crack split the night, followed by a roar that made the walls tremble. The ground shuddered as though struck by a giant's hand. Rachel gasped. "Michael!" He ran to the window. Across the street, Mrs. Coleman's massive cottonwood had split clean down the trunk. The colossal branches had crashed directly onto her house, crushing the roof above the main bedroom. Without thinking, Michael grabbed his coat and ran into the rain. Rachel followed, heart hammering. Lightning flashed, revealing splintered wood and torn shingles scattered across the yard like broken ribs. Neighbors poured out of their homes shouting, "Call 911!" Someone screamed, "Mrs. Coleman!" Michael shouted, wading through debris. "Mrs. Coleman, are you okay?" For one terrible moment, there was no answer. Then, the front door opened, and the old woman emerged, trembling, soaked, but alive. Tears streaked her face as she clutched her robe. "Michael," she sobbed. I wasn't in my room. I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. I moved to the guest bed. The tree crushed everything. My bed, it's gone." Rachel put an arm around her as sirens wailed in the distance. The rain beat down harder, washing away dust, fear, and doubt alike. Later, when the emergency crews had finished, when the neighbors had drifted back to their homes, Rachel and Michael stood in the quiet street staring at the fallen tree. 5 times, Rachel whispered. 5 times he's known. Michael nodded slowly. I don't think this is about warnings anymore. I think it's about faith. The next morning dawned soft and clear. The storm had swept the sky clean, leaving the world shimmering. Ethan woke early. He didn't ask for breakfast. He went straight to the garden, still wet from rain. Rachel followed quietly, watching from the doorway. He knelt before the niche, his small shoulders trembling. His lips moved quickly, whispering words Rachel couldn't hear. Then he fell silent, listening for a long time, longer than ever before. After a while, he nodded. Tears streamed down his cheeks, but his expression wasn't sorrow. It was peace. When he finally turned and walked back toward the house, Rachel met him halfway. Ethan, she said softly, kneeling to meet his eyes. What did she say? He sniffled, wiping his face. She said I helped who needed it, that it's okay now, that I can just be a kid. Rachel's throat tightened. Did she say goodbye? Ethan nodded. She said she'll always take care of me, even if I don't talk to her anymore, and that she's proud of me. Rachel pulled him into her arms and held him until his breathing steadied. Above them, the morning sun broke through the clouds. The garden glistened, every rose washed clean by the storm. The lady in blue had fallen silent, but her peace remained, alive in the laughter of a little boy who had finally been allowed to just be a child. That evening, as dusk softened the horizon, Rachel sat alone on the porch. The scent of wet roses drifted across the yard. From inside came the muffled sound of Michael reading to Ethan, his small giggle rising like music. She looked toward the statue of the Virgin Mary, its marble glimmering faintly under the first stars. Thank you, she whispered, for every warning, every mercy, every breath you gave through him. The wind moved through the garden, gentle and warm. The roses swayed, their petals unfurling, releasing a scent so rich it almost hurt. Rachel closed her eyes. For a heartbeat, she thought she heard a voice, soft and distant, like a lullaby sung through leaves. You were heard, long before you asked. And then, the garden was quiet again. Autumn crept gently into Denver. The cherry tree in the Thompson garden turned gold, and the roses that had bloomed like fire in summer now softened to dust pink and cream. Life in the house had changed, not through thunder or revelation, but through peace. The kind of peace that doesn't arrive with noise, only with gratitude. Months had passed since Ethan's last conversation with the lady in blue. And yet, her presence lingered everywhere, in the quiet hum of morning light, in the warmth that filled their home, in the way Ethan now laughed without hesitation. He was still the same boy, yet utterly transformed. The solemn child who once whispered to invisible company was now a whirl of energy, running barefoot across the grass, chasing leaves, begging Michael to play catch after dinner. His laughter filled corners of the house that had never known joy. Rachel often watched him from the kitchen window, her hands wet from dishes, her heart heavy with a sweetness she could hardly name. It was not sadness. It was awe. Awe at the mystery that had chosen to live briefly within their ordinary days, and then departed without warning, leaving only light behind. Sometimes Ethan still went to the garden, pausing before the Virgin's niche. He didn't speak. He only stood there for a moment, smiling faintly, then ran off to play. The first time he did that, Rachel nearly wept. She understood. He wasn't forgetting. He was saying hello. One Sunday morning, Rachel took Ethan with her to Massachusetts. Michael joined them this time. The church was bathed in amber light, the candles trembling in the draft of open doors. Ethan stood between them, small and solemn, his hand resting on Rachel's arm. When the choir began to sing the Salve Regina, Rachel noticed Ethan humming softly, the same melody he had once hummed at home, the one the lady had taught him. It rose faintly above the congregation, clear and pure, as though a second voice sang with him somewhere unseen. After communion, Rachel knelt, hands clasped, and whispered a prayer of thanks. Not for miracles, those had already happened, but for the quiet after them. The quiet in which faith learns to breathe again. When they left the church, an older woman from their parish approached. Her name was Mrs. Alvarez, and she had known Rachel's grandmother years ago. "I heard," she said gently, "about the little boy and the miracles. People are talking, you know." Rachel smiled softly. "Let them. Maybe it helps someone believe again." Mrs. Alvarez nodded. "The Virgin works quietly, dear. She doesn't need to be seen, only remembered." That afternoon, Rachel baked apple bread while Ethan played in the yard. She could hear his laughter through the open window, not the laughter of a prophet, not of a chosen child, but of a little boy at last unburdened. Michael came up behind her, arms slipping around her waist. "He's happy," he murmured. Rachel leaned back against him. "He is. You ever wonder," Michael asked, "if it'll happen again? If she'll speak to him when he's older?" Rachel thought for a long moment, then shook her head. "No. I think her message was never about continuing. It was about healing. Once love restores what's broken, the miracle can rest." Michael kissed her temple. "Then I guess we just keep living it." They stood there together, watching Ethan run through falling leaves, his laughter bright, his shadow golden in the late light. Winter came early that year. Snow drifted against the garden fence, blanketing the roses in white. The statue of the Virgin stood serene under its light dusting of frost, her stone hands cupped like someone still holding prayer. One evening, just after Christmas, Rachel found Ethan sitting at the window, staring out at the moonlit garden. His face was calm, thoughtful. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "No. I was thinking about her." Rachel sat beside him. "The lady?" He nodded. "Do you think she's watching?" Rachel followed his gaze to the statue, barely visible in the dark. "I think she always is. Maybe not the way we expect. Sometimes she watches through the people she's already touched." Ethan smiled, small and sleepy. "Then she's in you too." Rachel's heart caught. She drew him close. "Maybe that's what she wanted all along," she whispered. Ethan yawned. "To stay." "Yes," Rachel said, kissing his hair. "To stay." She carried him to bed and tucked him beneath the blanket. For a moment, she watched his breathing, steady, peaceful, before whispering one last Ave Maria at the doorway. Years later, neighbors would still talk about the night the tree fell, about the strange boy who knew. Some spoke of coincidence, others of visions. But those who truly knew the Thompsons never argued. They had seen what peace looks like after the extraordinary passes through a life. Rachel continued tending the garden faithfully. Each spring, the roses bloomed more vibrant than before, pinks deepening into crimson, white shining almost gold at their edges. Whenever she pruned them, she would murmur her grandmother's old prayer, "Mother of mercy, let what you once touched never fade." Michael, now grayer, built a small wooden bench beside the niche, where he often sat in the evenings with a cup of coffee, watching the light change. He didn't speak much about what had happened. Faith, he had learned, sometimes says more in silence than in words. And Ethan grew, strong, curious, kind. By the time he started school, he was known as the boy who listened before he spoke, who comforted frightened children with a calmness beyond his years. When teachers asked him where he learned such gentleness, he only smiled and said, "Someone kind taught me." On a quiet morning in spring, Rachel found herself once again kneeling in the garden. The sun was soft, the air cool, the roses ready to bloom. Ethan, now 6, was playing by the cherry tree, his laughter mingling with birdsong. Rachel touched the marble base of the Virgin statue, now withered and moss-kissed, and whispered, "I still see you here." For a moment, nothing moved. Then a breeze stirred, so gentle it barely bent the petals, yet strong enough to lift the scent of roses around her like incense. The air shimmered with warmth. Rachel closed her eyes. The scent was so strong, so sudden, it felt like an embrace. And in that stillness, she heard, not a voice, not words, but something deeper, the unmistakable sense of being known, completely and lovingly just as she was. When she opened her eyes, the garden was ordinary again. The roses swayed lazily. The Virgin's face gleamed faintly in the sun. Rachel smiled through her tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for coming to us, for staying." Ethan called from across the yard, "Mom! Look, the roses opened." She turned. The bushes, which had been tied buds moments before, now bloomed wide, drenched in color. Rachel laughed softly, a sound of wonder rather than surprise. The miracle had never left. It had only changed form, from visions and warnings into everyday grace, into laughter, into love. And sometimes, when the wind moved through the garden just right, carrying the faint, impossible scent of roses, Rachel would whisper the words that had begun it all. "Hi, Mary. I love you." And though no voice answered, she always felt the reply in her heart, steady, sure, eternal.